Hello, thank you for joining. My name is Thulani, and welcome to Propel Festival. Propel is a digital festival of contemporary performance created by students on the Contemporary Performance Practice program at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. We are joined by student artists Maddie Granland and Craig McCorquodale. We're all glad that you are able to be with us today in this conversation on site-specific work. Thank you, Craig and Maddie. Nice to see you both.
Yeah, you too.
Hi.
I've been working alongside Craig and Maddie with Rachel O'Neill as a visiting artist on the program. And I'm really glad to be able to chair this conversation where we'll be talking about the artist's works. So I'd like to draw your attention to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which opens up the Q&A box. So feel free to add questions at any point in the conversation, and when the time comes, I will try to get through all of your questions. So being that this is a digital festival, we may experience some technical difficulties. So if that does happen, Rachel O'Neill will take over, who is also present in this webinar. So to start us off, Maddie and Craig, would you like to begin just telling us a bit about yourselves and your art practice?
Sure, I can begin. Hi everyone, I'm Craig. Thank you for joining us today. I'm an artist working across the lines of experimental performance, live art and dance. And I would describe my work as visceral, exposing, and always made from my own experience, attempting somehow to offer a fragment of now, or lean into the fundamental chaos and uncertainty of the world in which we live. I would characterize my work as having the presence of an unlikely collaborator, so people, places, or things that we might not typically encounter in performance spaces, to question where and on whose ground art might exist. I would identify then with an evolving social practice and a methodology that seems more applicable for the incomplete and divided subjects of today. And I think I'm interested in all of the different nuances and tensions of working with people in different places. I'd like to challenge the assumption that social practice, artworks, and main stage theatre productions are mutually exclusive. And so I'd like to push the aesthetic of what working with people, whoever they might be, is. Previously, I've produced work or happenings where I've danced on the roof of a car park, become best friends with a 10-year-old, and become an apprentice with a group of construction workers. Recently, I've started to speak about my work as explorations into construction sites. This has come directly from my dad's construction company, which has been in our family, passed down to each son for 100 years. I'm interested in thinking through these spaces as I believe that they expose things as they are, or that we might be able to see beneath the surface, that everything in these spaces is always unfinished and in process. It makes me think that human beings are also unfinished and in process, made and unmade differently every day, and that there's no such thing as fixed identity, that we're all vulnerable, always changing, and I think that might make us a bit more empathetic towards each other. I'm also interested in performance as construction sites because it teaches me something about processes of repair. So how to pick up the pieces when it feels like things have fallen or changed, or how to gather a sense of meaning in a culture that seems broken. And I feel like that's applicable for all of us in so many different ways. I'm interested in obscuring sort of contemporary discourses around gender, specifically around male identity. And the last piece of work I made, Men at Work, maybe dealt with that more explicitly. However, I like to think of it existing in everything that I do because it's always being read in relation to me. I'm interested in pushing the potential of the performing body and how performance might be a transformative space for both performer and audience. And I've been thinking recently about all the empty theatre spaces that exist just now and the potential futures of these spaces. And that was the starting point for the digital artwork that I made recently, that I hope you've all seen, called Intervals, that was presented alongside Maddie's work further down the beach, to, I suppose, somehow comprehend what happens when things stop or when they finish unexpectedly. So yes, that's some information about my practice.
Great, thank you, Craig. Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie Granland. And I have a live art practice or interdisciplinary performance art. I'd say that I mainly focus on image making, and my practice is very materials based. I like to think of myself and my body as a material that is a medium through which I make my art, and a material that is horizontal with all the other materials around me. So like equal and in an ecology together. Maybe I'm not even interested in, but I've seemed to have happened to always use a sort of minimal amount of tools or things around me. I like to sort of just take what I have and see how I can use that to transform or transcend spaces or objects or our own bodies. And through that, I think I'm interested in sort of completely exposing how things are in the world or how I'm making an image or setting something up, but at the same time allowing there to be space for a sense of magic or something. Yeah, some of the inquiry lines that have gone through my work for the past while now is this idea of meshing digital and organic materials. This sort of idea of meshing these materials feels like it was placed in the icon of a cyborg, which was sort of what I've thought about the last couple projects that I've been doing, sort of this body that holds the digital and the organic, like cybernetic organism, organic, as just a way to sort of think through my body about how, yeah, the world is changing and becoming less and less organic, or we're sort of starting to live in a more mediated way. I'm really interested in using live performance to think about liveness and what that means now. Obviously, we're like on a digital platform and it's like live, but and I think it's interesting to work in that area now when I've been thinking about that for quite a while, specifically in relation to cyborg, sort of how something can be, alive, but also not alive, or organic and non-organic. It can be present and absent, or real and non-real. It can be sort of these binaries at the same time. And looking at that as a means to understand how our identities as people or beings or objects in the world as constantly shifting, and especially recently in many ways. I've been really drawn to this idea of uncanniness, which is sort of the unalignment of things, or this sort of looks like the thing but not quite enough like the thing, this strangely familiar but familiarly strange. And I think that's been really interesting for me to think through that about how the world feels dissonant or weird or disconnected or detached, but also how that can be an aesthetic holding for performance making, this unalignment or shadows or layers or these in-between spaces that feel a bit ghostly or haunted, and the sort of dissolving boundaries between all things. I use a lot of ecological theory and ideas and practices, and I'm sort of interested in this, like, there is no elsewhere. We're all in this ecology and there's nowhere to leave, to go out to. There's just things within things within things within things. And I think that's really exciting to explore through materiality in performance, and just see how far you can kind of go down that thing. And yeah, recently I've been interested, I know you were talking about this as well, some stuff that we both kind of were thinking about recently is this idea of imagination as sort of a radical tool for future building or creating things. So I've been thinking about how objects hold both the real material of themselves, but also the sort of perception or idea that we put onto them, and how we can use our minds or imagination to sort of almost be anarchists and change everything up and mess it up and make everything not so rigid. Yeah, those are the things I've been thinking about.
Great, thank you. So we're just going to move on to the Q&A section of today's artist talk. We'll spend about 20 minutes where I'll be questioning the artists about their work. And then after that, we'll move into the final stage where the audience will get an opportunity to ask the artists questions. So it would be really great to hear about how you both interpret this idea of site specificity in your work and in your processes.
Yeah, I guess following on from some of the things I was just talking about, I've been thinking about site like ecologically, like as in a site only exists because of its relation to all other sites. And this idea of the local and the non-local. So yeah, I'm just thinking about making work in this flat that we're in. We've kind of had to do that. But it's made me really think about what's the local experience for me and what I'm coming into contact with consistently all the time, every day of my life, but also how I'm being incredibly affected by things at a really great distance, the non-local, and how everything in this space is sort of like shifted and made different by the fact that it exists in relation to a much bigger site or bigger world.
Yeah, we were thinking that site is different from space and place because it's always defined by a sense of action or activity or some sort of sense of industry in that place. That feels quite nice, especially I suppose now where it feels like people are overcome with inertia or like boredom or things like that. But yeah, we've been working with an interesting definition of site specificity that we found in the book Expanded Sonographies, where they sort of suggest that site-specific practice is the encounter or exchange between the spatial and material relations of objects, bodies, and environments. And I suppose it makes me think of the importance of context in site-specific work, maybe more so than other practices, in that the form is always directed and dictated by the given circumstances of the site. And I'm really inspired by the artist placement group who coined the phrase "context is half the work." That it's sort of unable to be divided between the content and the form, which I think feels like a nice way to approach it.
Yeah, really having to be relevant. Like I feel like we've engaged in wanting to think about the site that way, but I also think that was a lot from necessity of having to be so consumed by site or context.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. So Craig, I just wanted to go back to your point that you made in your introduction. You're talking about how you work in the context of construction sites, and that's one of your sort of interests at the moment. That really resonates with me because that's something I'm also interested in, the potential of construction sites. And I really was interested in how you speak about this idea of revealing the site and exposing the site. Can you maybe talk a bit about how this idea of exposing translated in this process that you just undertook?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Thulani. Yeah, I guess it has been an interesting methodology to apply to site-specific practice, because maybe a starting point for me was like asking myself what the constructs of this site were, and how maybe my role as an artist was to draw the audience's attention to a process of deconstruction or something. So constantly shifting between those two things, I think, is the territory that I'm making from. But interestingly, I was imagining making a performance on a real life construction site before we, moved into digital world. But I would still argue maybe that like the work I made was an exploration of construction site, because I was drawn towards referencing the landscapes of theatre that is in itself a landscape of construction. And I've been, reading some stuff that suggests that even if we might exist out with a theatre site specifically, there are still auditoriums, curtains, stages. The sort of theatrical apparatus exists even when we live outside of those architectures. So I've been interested in how I can find different household objects or different scenographies around my flat that offer a sense of revealing and obscuring. And actually, I think I've found a means of articulating that I wouldn't have found otherwise by working with a camera. I think that there is something, there's a detail that you can't always get in live performance, or a means to manipulate the audience's eye when you're working with a lens or a screen or a rectangle or something. So I think that's also really enabled me to construct the images, or it's enabled me to control what you can see or something. I'm thinking about when I accidentally dropped my phone out the window and then slowed that footage down, and it was like, an accident. But nonetheless, really made you see things differently. So I guess that's the crux of it, I think.
Thank you, Craig. And Maddie, you spoke about the idea of hauntings and working with different layers of worlds. And for me, what really came to me, this idea of palimpsest that you both spoke about in your video work, which again is another idea that I work with in my own processes, as I see the sites that I engage in and that I work with as palimpsests to be revealed and exposed and investigated. Can you maybe also speak about how that idea of palimpsest translated in this process?
Yeah, I think I've really continuously been interested in this idea of layering, which is basically sort of this idea of palimpsests, like layers within objects, sort of showing a time or a ecology of things existing together on top of each other. I think previously I've been looking at these in-between spaces, I've been doing this little hand motion thing. Previously I've been looking at it a bit like trying to find the in-between spaces of all the different things like that and exposing them to be seen. And I think this time I was sort of interested in like just looking at them all the way through and trying to see how many things you can kind of see at once. There's this really interesting sort of mythology, this Japanese idea. It's like this old idea of what a space is or what the world is, and that there's 4 layers. So the first layer is this transparent sky where all of the supernatural or the ideas or the things that aren't physically there exist on top of everything. And the second layer down is the trees and the energy sort of in the world that we know. The third layer is like our present being, our here and now. And then the fourth layer is the old sky that fell, and it's the underground with all the histories. And so I like this idea of seeing sites or worlds like with all of these layers, and how to expose all of them at the same time to sort of imply like a really massive ecology of all ways of perceiving things, which I think ultimately ends up being a bit haunted or eerie, because you see shadows of different things in the one thing. Like, for example, I think like a big ecological thing is that there's a sense of feeling haunted, and whether that's like seeing the shadow of one thing on the other thing, or the dents or the marks that one object has left on another, and these sort of traces that are left because all of the things are existing in the same place. So I think that's really exciting to look at sight in that way, and try and through digital means or through how I chose to frame it or film it, or the words that were giving the context on top of it, trying to open up that sight to just be like all the layers or whatever you saw in it.
Yeah, so Rachel has kindly placed an example of a palimpsest in the chat, this sort of parchment and document used for writing. And the idea is that sort of layers of parchment would be placed on top of each other. And yeah, so there's, I guess, this idea of transparency as well. You're able to see the sort of the underlying layers. And I guess this idea of, as you were talking about what lies beneath, you know, what layers lie beneath the site is really interesting. When I watched both of your videos, I felt like you both had a real sort of sensuous imagery, which awakened this idea of a memory of senses. You know, you had these close-ups of skin, images of water, of nature, which I felt connected to Laura Marx's concept of haptic visuality and the notion of being able to sense and perceive materials and objects. And I guess what I find interesting while thinking about Laura Marx's theories is how she connects haptic visualities to mourning, and particularly in her work in The Skin of the Film. It's a book that she wrote while she was writing about filmmakers and how they sort of use film to process mourning. So I've just got a quote here that I thought connected to your work. She writes, "Here, the process of creation is explicitly linked to the mournful state in its attempts to not only listen to ghosts, but to create a space where it is always possible for them to return. Paramount here is the point that haptic images encourage the viewer to engage with the image through memory." I felt like this really connected to both your work, and I guess I was thinking whether you could reflect and share how these ideas and how you use the site in your own home as a way to sort of address loss and mourning and longing, possibly.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really exciting theory by Laura Marx, actually, the haptic visuality discussion. And I think it's something I felt really concerned about when we approached this process, that, you know, we'd lost the ability to be with an audience in a live space for them to see the sweat, you know, hear our breath, like those visceral qualities of performance making. So I think we've both gone on quite interesting processes of trying to have a sensuous approach to the objects or the things that might exist here, to develop a sort of visual dramaturgy. And I think we do that quite differently, actually, but I like to think that there is a larger holding frame for it. I've been thinking a lot about loss and grief and longing, I suppose, in terms of how do we even begin to comprehend all of these spaces that have been annulled, revoked, closed. So many of the bars I used to go to, shops I like to go to, are shut now, and I'm walking past boarded up shop fronts and everything. It's quite, there's tons of collective grief, I think, right now. And in loads of ways as well. I've been inspired by Esther Perel, who is a Belgian psychoanalyst who has also become a bit of a life coach for me. And she speaks about how this time is characterized by a lot of anticipatory grief about the loss of normalcy, the loss of boundaries between people living together, the loss of separate space, but also the trepidation and fear about what a return to normal might look like. So I think both of our works actually are quite melancholic, and I was certainly trying to achieve a sense of that loss somehow, but also through my own body, I suppose, too. This is my flat. It's the place where I've gone through loads of things. It is full of all of those palimpsests, all of those layers. So yeah, I think it's interesting because I think my work feels quite solo in that sense. It feels like you have a real awareness that I've constructed all of these spaces myself to show you, and it does feel quite lonely. Whereas, your work feels maybe, well, it's the two of us, but it still has that sense of longing to go somewhere else, perhaps.
I think, also for me, I'm seeing a lot of, having to do this digitally and maybe having thought about digital works before in a different way, but now actually needing to use the platform to connect with each other, or using digital means in light of a lack of live interaction or live performance. I feel like the fact that it's digital always holds a sense of mourning, the fact that, I don't know exactly how to say this, the fact that it's digital is implying that the liveness or something is postponed or held. The thing that would carry on or continue decaying or wouldn't be absent is now held and mummified or distilled or something. And in that way, I think it does hold this sort of ghost of mourning. Yeah.
That's interesting. I guess I'm thinking a lot about my own process at the moment, considering that you were working at home. Your site was the place of, it was your home, it was your residence, but also your site, a place of work. And I guess when working with sites specifically, there's always the sort of breakaway, the site that you're working in is the place which you spend time in. I guess there's a certain intimacy developed over time, but there's always that opportunity to break away, and to return with sort of fresh eyes and maybe make new discoveries. And I guess you didn't have that. You didn't have that breakaway space. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear about how using your home as your site possibly affected how you worked with the site or affected your process of working.
I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard, and we both use these pictures of the walls and these images of the walls are really focused. I think we really, really were able to completely consume ourselves in this site, obviously all the time, every day. But it starts making you think more and more and literally dig into those layers so far, and just the images of the walls or the bedroom desk and stuff. It was just never ending. I feel it was chasing us everywhere. You're looking at that image, trying to dissect the image, and then you turn around and it's there.
You're editing on your computer when the image you're editing is the wall you're looking at.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, that was really hard or mind-boggling or something. But I also think in a lot of ways that's what the work was about, or maybe a sense of being trapped or isolated, not even just in a like COVID isolated way, but in a more wide way. And I think maybe it wasn't the funnest way to do it, but it was like the most immersive way to like explore the inquiries that we each had in this site.
Yeah, it made me feel like the possibility of each object in the flat, or like each material that we were working with, was tons larger than I maybe imagined at first or something. It's like, I think in both of our works we're asking you to, or like maybe in my work I'm thinking of the image with the kettle that's boiled halfway. I'm asking you to literally look at a kettle being boiled halfway for 2 minutes, and it's like got a real sense of time and patience and boredom and everything. But I do think there is something interesting about just being here and looking at the same thing over and over and over again, where things take on, new, they're more significant. They have different permutations when you are just having to be amongst them for a while. It's like the biggest artist residency like in the world or something. It is really hard, but there is maybe something also interesting about the way that our homes have started to perform different functions during this time. It's like they've started to take on the identities of different sites or different spaces. Like, I don't know, what is that? Like, your house also has to be your place of work, your bar, your like all the other spaces that you rely on to have some sort of map.
We have a joke about this, talking about the space becoming everything. It's like, oh, it might be your office or your makeshift office, or just like listing every single room in the house.
Yeah.
Every room can now be
your utility room. But yeah, I guess it's been hard, but it's been really fascinating. I feel like maybe both of our works were asking you to like look at not just the object as we know it, but like the materials that make the object, like the wood or the glass or the things before we knew what they were. And I think I've just started to think of each thing as a landscape or something, and if that doesn't sound too hard to get on board with.
I also think the more sort of familiar you become with something, the more you can see past it and sort of like transcend the obvious, and I don't know. I think it helps to look beyond things and see a greater meaning in things once they become familiar.
And even just changing things very differently as well, like when Maddie tilts the picture on our wall, or like a different use of light, for example, or I think I've been quite surprised about how small a change can produce a significant change in the meaning or the image.
You were speaking a bit about possibilities, Craig, and I would really like to speak about accessibility and audience in site-specific contexts. I guess one of the opportunities that I've found in working in site-specific contexts is sort of by working off-site and going beyond conventional performance space or gallery, there's usually real opportunity to broaden access to the work. And it feels like working digitally has possibly expanded your audience and who can see the work. Can you speak a bit about working digitally with regards to accessibility and your audience?
I mean, I'm like from Minnesota, and so a lot of people that I know or family or whoever don't get to see any of my work. So like, I think some people are here right now, and like they could they could see my video, or our video online, which is really exciting because that's never been able to happen before. And I think maybe just because I'm coming from like an international situation, it means more to me that work can be spread digitally, like more globally. But I think that is really exciting in terms of, graduating and trying to get our work out there and see what that can do, but also about sort of starting wider conversations with people in different places who are going to be, like, especially with sight, are going to be experiencing sight differently than here in a Glasgow flat, So I think that's really, really exciting for me to be able to share that wider than with just a Glasgow community.
It feels like really rooted in the founding ideologies of site-specific practice, which was just about like moving out with the gallery, because the gallery as a white box was limited and problematic. And it feels like, maybe we're entering into a bit of a different discussion about that now. That feels really exciting to acknowledge like so many barriers that are in the way of people being able to access the art in the first place that sometimes I think are quite hidden or invisible actually. So it has been really interesting to consider all of those things. I feel maybe like quite torn between all of the amazing possibilities that working digitally has offered, whilst also like I don't want to be too quick to dismiss the purpose or the importance or the sacredness of being in a specific time at a specific place in the same shared space, because I wonder if it is easy. We've had a lot of success with artists working online to I don't know, forget a bit about the liveness as we once knew it or something. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think digital stuff though also, like on the opposite side, does give people a lot more control over what they're doing and the space they're using and taking up or whatever. And I think like I'm interested in loads in knowing that like technology and all these things have kind of been co-opted as these like capitalist tools really, but they're so new and they're so sort of DIY that you can really find out ways to take it back and like make it into something different that suits each person, which is maybe more possible than in like live spaces and gallery spaces and in like those funded kind of spaces or something.
Yeah, I guess I'm still really thinking about the amount of time that you both have spent in this space of residence and also the site that you've been working with in this process, and how there's an opportunity there to create intimacy with the site. But it felt, for me at least, while watching your videos, you both had such a really strong visual language, which I think was attained from you having this real strong relationship with the site. And it made me really think about, I guess your YouTube video made me think about the photographer Miroslav Tiki and how he describes photography as painting with light. I thought there was a real sensibility of formal visual elements in your work, such as space and texture, line, color, composition. Can you speak about how you each developed such a strong and individual visual language through your process of working with the site?
Yeah, I think that working site specifically does really demand that you pay attention to those things, maybe more so than studio theatre spaces, although arguably not. I think you're talking about painting with light, Thulani. I've been surprised about how reliant you are actually when you're filming in this space on the light, like, and not just the time of day necessarily, but the space you're working in, the way that it hits your body, all those things feels really dependent on the visual elements, but also the movements of the world as well, and the senses of time. I actually decided to film all of my footage in one day, and not for any other reasons, but to try and offer a sense of time, I guess, to try and move us through the 24-hour or less than that motions of a day at a time where it feels like maybe we've lost a sense of rhythm and pace and time or whatever. But yeah, I think that we've both gone on separate journeys with like the sort of visual vocabulary or the visual dramaturgy around our work. But I think I was also trying to reference theatricality a bit as well, and like bring in some of these landscapes of the theatre to elevate this sort of everyday, banal aesthetic that I might have otherwise been working with to sort of, to do a similar thing that Maddie is trying to do in terms of colliding worlds or, smash together different visual languages or something.
I think we're both kind of obsessed with light and the idea of light. I feel like that probably comes a bit from Rachel, who's like also obsessed with light. But I think these ideas is sort of that objects are constantly literally changing because the shadow of them is changing throughout the day. So like light is literally changing objects all the time. And this sort of sense of being caught up in something a lot bigger. Like the idea that the sun, like all the way far away, is like literally changing the room I'm in. Feels really relevant to this idea of like trying to bring those exterior landscapes into my landscape of this flat. And just knowing that all of the objects in the whole room is being shifted and moved constantly by something at such a great distance, like in the same way that our lives are now sort of like halted or whatever because of something that's happening so globally and maybe not to you personally. But nevertheless, it's all affected. And I think like for the visual style, I think I was just trying to like see what the objects offered me or what the site offered me working with blue or green screen. The walls just happened to be those colors. I did not even paint that for this, but that just became like the color palette just built itself because I had to use those colors technically. And I just think a lot of the visual language was born out of just listening to the stuff around me, I guess.
And I think it's about trying to create a feeling as well. Like I've been feeling really aware about the loss of other theatre spaces or something like might remove the ability for the work to be as felt. But I actually think that there's so many emotions contained in those basic principles that you were referencing, like line and form and colour and everything.
That's great. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to questions from the audience. So the first question I have is from Laura. And Laura asks, how has this experience of working in this way altered your understandings of liveness? You are speaking a lot about the space in between. Do you see the work you have made as in between the live and the meditated? How does this affect your understanding of your own arts practice? It's a great question.
Yeah, I think, it's definitely this between, live mediated sort of thing. It's between these, I think in a lot more ways than I even knew when I was making it. I think everyone's understanding of liveness right now is like completely shifted. Or I think that's always happening all the time in the world because crazy stuff is always happening and we're always reminded about our identity within being alive or whatever. So I think that's always shifting. But I think maybe I've previously worked more directly with like digital things as like a material, whereas this was more like the platform that I was presenting the work on, which did change it. I feel like I'm not sure how it changed that yet, but I think it's definitely a different approach when you're looking at liveness.
And there's questions of liveness, like you're saying, Maddie, not even in the content of the work, but in the edges that you view it from, like the actual viewing platform. Like I remember we were trying to stream it live on YouTube and then had some technical problems, so had to upload it as a video, but uploading it as a video felt really different from streaming it live because it felt like it just was doing the same thing as the videos that we always watch on YouTube anyway. And is it live if it's still a video, but we know people are going to be watching it at the same time? Like, so yeah, those are some things we've been grappling with a bit. And actually, I'm not quite sure either.
I guess some of these things only make sense, further down the line once you've had space to process, your process. The next question is, whereas in site-specific work, there is an opportunity to bring in new or different audiences that are otherwise not possible in a gallery or theatre space, do you think sharing or producing work online might lead to an echo chamber, creating a space only for those already interested in the topic?
That's
another
a good
interesting question.
Yeah, I think I feel quite concerned about that. That's a really good question. Because I would say that, the ability for site-specific art to encounter different constituents or different communities of people is really super important to me. I wonder if there is something about I'm just thinking about, so I shared the work we made on Facebook, and I've got quite a diverse group of Facebook friends actually, out with the realm of our art making community. And I think a lot of people that wouldn't have come to the work in a gallery or a performance space actually have accessed it and found different resonances and meanings that I might not have expected. So I do think the social media thing is probably quite progressive in terms of different audiences. But yeah, I think it is still undeniable that something in a different space, live, on the street or somewhere else. Yeah, I think I'm feeling still quite sad about that.
I have a question in relationship to that question, which I may be still forming in my head, but it's got something to do with parameters that are usually show up when you're working on site, and sort of these parameters usually, in working with within the parameters, you usually discover a new opportunity, and a new way of working. And obviously being involved in your process and hearing some of the challenges that you had, this parameter of the world that we're living in at the moment and the limitations of the lockdown. I'm just thinking about whether you felt there were sort of opportunities there or sort of discoveries there in working in this really limited way.
Yeah, I think I quite like working being limited because it allows you to not wonder what you could have had and just get on with what you do have and not second guess yourself as much. You just sort of have to do the things that you have to do. And I think that really allows me to get involved in those things around me and really, really question them because that's all I have. So I think for me, it allowed me to sort of just be more creative and open. And I also think the parameters sort of keep it in a similar framework. So it was almost like a lot of what I did was just a lot of intuitive making or images that I just felt like I wanted in it. But because the parameters were so tight around what I was able to do, things that were just intuition all seemed to sort of fall into place together more easily. Which was nice because it was all just sort of existing in this little house and my mind is here and everything seemed to sort of mesh together more easily because the parameters were constrained.
One thing I think about literally all the time, and it's it was written by Sarah Hopfinger, if she's watching. she has written this article where she speaks about the...
She is present.
She's present. Hi, Sarah. Also, Sarah knows that I talk about this all the time, so that's a bit awkward. She speaks about the rewilding processes as the construction of fences to enable the transgression of those fences. And there's something really, for me, that's just always it, because it's you can only have freedom if you have the structure to enable the freedom, or if you have some sort of edges to make within, some productive fence to push against. So I always think about that. And I think that in this context, the parameters have created some interesting economy of expectation or something, or a set of rules that we can push against or exploit, but they need to be there in the first place. And actually, I think we've both done an interesting job about like really responding to what we have to respond to now as well, and maybe letting go of what could have been and what we could have made, and just making what can happen here.
Yeah, or like still holding on to the ideas of what we could have made, and like those bigger things and that much imagining, but somehow try and squish it into here, or make that real, but here instead, I guess.
So Sarah Hopfinger is asking, hello. Hi, Sarah. What an amazing conversation. Thank you, all three of you. Your thoughts on sight, ghosts, loss, and mourning were especially interesting. For me, the performances that really affect me at the moment are those that allow for or enact some kind of space for mourning and grief. Has this current time and current project you've been engaged in shifted or opened out your understanding of the role of performance, or what role you want performance to have? Another great question.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a bit about that in some ways actually, and I came across this interesting, sorry, I will close it, this interesting provocation from Tim Crouch, which I'm sure many of you will have seen, where he suggests that right now we're living in an art state where things are freighted and weighted with different significances, and that nothing contains just one thing, and that social distancing allows us to perceive distance better, allows us to perceive our space better. And I wonder if there is something to do with empathy in there, or like sort of collectivity or a sense of community that we should maintain once we're out of the art state and the gravitational pull wants to change again. So yeah, I'm not sure, Sarah, if that answers your question, but I just, yes, I've been thinking about those things.
I think I've really had a lot more thoughts about the role of audience in performance during this time, because to me, almost like the making of it feels generally similar to what I've done before, but maybe the platforms and the audience, the interaction that you're actually able to have, and the impact or the sharing of a moment together is completely different. And I think like this is all still so new, that this whole like digital performance thing since the last couple months. But I think it is really interesting to start to think about other mediums and other ways that performance can exist in, and that performance isn't just this systematic like way of doing something that we continuously see, but it can actually be like tons and tons of different things, or just different ways of basically like trying to communicate something and share something with other people in by any means possible, I guess.
And I guess one thing I've been thinking about in relation to like some of the reading I've been doing around empty theatres is like acknowledging that we as a society are really bad at doing nothing or stopping, and just having to grapple with that, or just having to be amongst a pause or a suspension of activity, an interval, you could say. But yeah, I do really believe that there is meaning in that moment, or like there is, things begin to thaw, or like the ice melts a bit, and we have to,
like recalibrating, and that time isn't just empty time; it's very, very full time.
Because it's allowing us to actually grieve together and acknowledge that grief is worthy and needed. And
Great. So we only have a few minutes left, so this will be the last question. Rachel O'Neill is asking, if you were given a commission to create a reimagining of this work post-COVID, what site would you choose? Good question.
I would like to, so my site was this flat, but also metaphorically my site was a shoreline. So I would probably reimagine it on a shoreline, and see, like, I think that would be cool, because I've already done this, almost maybe the opposite. So maybe it would be like, I tried to bring these external landscapes internally, and maybe like if I somehow tried to create like this domestic squared off like flat environment on a shoreline instead, I wonder what that would look like. But it's nice to know that I wouldn't have just wanted to do that in the first place. I feel like I want to do that now because I've done this.
Yeah, maybe I would, in the same approach we're taking, maybe I would do it in an empty theatre or like a big traditional theatre space. And maybe the task would be to try and find a sense of intimacy within that space, or to try and like, allow the work to occupy all the people that are not there or something. Maybe there's like some cranes and some industrial equipment, like, you know, around or something. But yeah, that is interesting, because we have been thinking about like shorelines, theatres, construction sites, all these other spaces in relation to this work. But it is interesting to think about how much, of course, of this site is the whole work, actually. So yeah, that feels meaningful.
Yeah, things to think about and process. So that brings us to the end of our artist talk. Thank you both for being present and sharing your ideas and processes with all of us. And thank you to our audience as well for joining us today. Just to say to Maddie and Craig, you know, you've really created strong pieces of work and you should be really proud of yourselves. And congratulations. Especially congratulations on making work at this time that we're currently in as well. You know, yeah, really well done. So I'd also like to bring your attention to the other shows that are on this evening. There's House, directed by Dan Brown at 7 p.m. and Net, directed by Genevieve Jagger, is on at 8 p.m. So you can get your tickets from the RCS box office online. I also thought it would be remiss to not take this opportunity to use this digital site that we are all currently occupying to address what's happening in the US and in our site of global politics that we are all part of and that affects us all. And thinking about this, I wanted to quote Sonia Renee Taylor, who speaks about this moment in time that we're confronted with. This is a moment of reckoning. We must decide that what is behind us is vile, inhumane, and unattainable, that whatever we must lose is necessary, and wherever we are going, we know we aren't going backwards. The entire world is protesting, and we are being offered a new possibility, but not without loss and change and risk. In this moment, whether you want a new way of life or want the comfort and convenience of the old one, the new way is a faith walk. We must each decide if we are truly ready to leave what is behind us. And I think, Maddie, do you have some links that you'd like to direct people towards?
Yeah, I just have a couple things. Just a reminder that this talk and our video were free tickets. And so it'd be really great if people wanted to pass that money onward and donate it. I just have a couple things that just put in the chat. 3 different places. One is a larger collective, one is young activists for political change, and the third one is just my friend is doing supply runs in the Twin Cities for all the people who have been displaced or affected by current happenings there. So just, direct supplies for them.
Okay, so they've just said that they can't see the links. I'm just going to copy and paste them. Maddie, can you share those links so that attendees can see?
I think I just changed it.
Can anyone see them?
Great. Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and please, make an effort to see some work this evening. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.